really exciting for us. Audrey Aronson Johnson is a local treasure, and she is one of our unofficial local historians, and you are going to hear her talk about her family, about growing up in Lakeville, about her experiences, and it's really special. It's really special when you have the opportunity to talk to these folks in town who were part of the beginning of our community and watched it grow and watched all of the pieces come together to what we are today. And Audrey has written a book, and obviously you see it on the screen, and she's got them up here. And it's called The Only Woman in the Room. And this, I read the book, and this is a book that every single one of us wishes that we had from the generations before us. And it is a book that every single one of us should write for the generations after us. And Audrey, it's truly a love letter to your family. It's a love letter to your parents, to your husband, to your children, all of the accomplishments, all of your memories. The pictures in here are amazing. It is such a special book. So I highly encourage you. She does have these available today for sale for $20, and she will autograph them for you. Cash or check, there is an ATM here. If you don't have either of those, talk to Shannon. We can get you set up with credit card at the chamber, and we'll pass that through to Audrey. But this is just a really special memoir that she's written. And so we're going to dive into this a little bit. You're going to talk a little bit about it, Audrey. But again, we could not be more excited to have you here. So Audrey, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, you ready? All right, Audrey, let's do a quick mic check on this. Let's say good morning to everybody. Let's make sure Shannon can hear you in the back.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
All right, everybody's good. Are we ready to get started, Audrey?
Yes.
Let's start from the beginning, right?
Okay.
You were an only child, and you had a very special relationship with your parents. So let's talk a little bit about your childhood, a little bit about growing up here in this great community of Lakeville.
Good, I will. I'll do that. But before I do, I want to thank you all for coming. It means a lot. Some of us have been trying to get together for breakfast for how long, Bob? How long, Dan? Long time. So anyway, thank you very much for coming. I wanted to particularly welcome Mike Aronson and his wife, Janine. He is a memoirist, lives in Rochester, and he's awesome. If any of you is thinking of writing your own story, Mike, he's right down here in the striped shirt. Talk to me about him. He gets 5 stars and A+. It is true. I am an only child, and my parents, Leo and Lillian, were terrific. Mother was a lovely, gracious lady who kept the home fires burning, while Daddy and I ran in and out with his mayoral duties and my teenage duties. Daddy had a farm machinery dealership here in downtown, and he was also mayor from 1958 to 1969. I was born in 1937, and at that time, Lakeville was 300 people. I learned the other day we're now the 9th, did you tell me? 9th largest city in the state at about 72,000 people. So that's called growth, isn't it? I was a son Daddy never had. So he took me into his business right away. I think I was this tall. And my first job was to sweep his office. And I had a little children's broom and dustpan. And so that was a duty. And then the culture that he sold to me strongly was to be really nice to every customer. And then he went on at an early age to teach me that you can probably make it in life if you do 2 things. You got to show up. And that's the first point. And the second point is you need to learn to get along with the folks. Good stuff, wasn't it, you know?
Just a little bit, yep.
Okay. Needless to say, he was influential, very influential in my choosing business as a career path.
All right, should we move on to the next one?
Yes.
All right. So you started a club with your grade school class,
Yes.
and you still meet to this day.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about this. When do you meet? Where do you meet?
Yes.
Let's hear about that.
Judy Young and I became pals in first grade. We were competitive in the spell down, as I recall. And so we were good friends all through high school. We co-edited the newspaper as seniors. Then Judy went off to St. Kate's and I went off to St. Olaf. But back when we were in our 30s, we got back together again and celebrated birthdays with each other, treating the other for the birthday. After a short while, Kathy White joined us and Mary Sullivan, and then Snoelle Nelson, and then Mary Gallagher. So now we were 6 in what had become officially our first grade birthday club. And you're not going to believe this, but it's been alive and well for 50 years and it's still going. Although 6 has now become 3. And as we speak, I'm to be planning a party for Mary next month when she joins all of us who are 87 now. And it's really fun to go to a restaurant. We go to places like the Lex. We go all the good restaurants in town. It's really fun to tell the server who we are. We're all 87 now, so we're celebrating that. And they say, what? And then give us really good service.
All right, let's talk a little bit about our favorite festival. So our 58th annual Panaprog Festival is coming up next month, July 6th through 14th. Tell us a little bit. You have a pretty special connection to Panaprog. Let's talk a little bit about Panaprog.
Again, when Daddy was mayor, Carlton Hitchcock, Minneapolis businessman, had the dream of building an industrial park with an airstrip here in Lakeville. But one thing he needed help with was talking to the farmers about how would they like to sell their farms for an airstrip. So he came to Daddy, who was a farm machinery dealer, and asked if Daddy would go talk with the farmers. Daddy always looked for opportunities for me to grow and learn. So Daddy said, I'm going to talk to the farmers tonight. Hop in the truck, let's go together. So Daddy and I went out, talked to the farmers, and they said, Leo, are you drunk? Or are you sick? Or have you gone crazy? Or what? You're out of your mind. Talking to me about my cornfield becoming an airstrip. Then they looked at me and asked the same questions. Long story short, it all happened as we know. And I think ours is one of the very largest industrial parks in the state, isn't it?
Yes.
So then, Carlton Hitchcock felt that it was becoming that we would celebrate all of the good stuff that had happened. So he and Daddy and many others planned the first Panaprog in 1967. Daddy was chairman of the committee, I think, and my mom and dad were grand marshals. This was quite a big deal back then. My mom with her hat and her purse and her gloves. Those of you who knew her knew how refined and gracious she was. In the convertible going down Main Street, I remember it still. So that's my connection with Panaprog. And by the way, Panaprog means panorama of progress. Okay.
All right. I just want to know, did you ever do the cow chipping contest? That's the one we hear the most about. Do you remember that?
I remember it. I didn't do it, but husband Brad did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So obviously, Lakeville's changed a little bit over the years. And so I think it's fun for everyone to hear a little bit about some of the places that you went to as a child and that are no longer here. So let's talk a little bit about some of those fun historical places.
first thing that came to mind when I looked at this question was Babes. When Babes was being built back in 1962, it was built as a municipal liquor store. And our phone at my home rang off the hook day after day and night after night about how it was being built so far from the center of town that it would certainly fail. That was the message over and over. Daddy would get on the phone. He would just hang out. As we all know, they were all wrong. The next story is about Beer Annie Ring. George and Annie Ring had a tavern just across the street here. And my friend Tolly and I would go there for our ice cream cones. Beer Annie was very generous, and she would give us great big ice cream cones like this. Then there was a day when my mother discovered where we had been going for our ice cream cones. And gracious mother didn't think much of it. So she shut down that avenue for cones and made us go to the drugstore or the restaurant next door, which was more suitable in her judgment for little 7-year-old girls and their ice cream. Ed Cease's drugstore was also right across the street, and there were several big booths at the rear of the store, and a common thing for us to do at the end of a school day was, Kathy White and I especially did this, pour in there and have a chili Coke or a garbage special and rework what had happened, who was dating who was fighting with whom, all that good stuff at the end of the day. Garbage specials were all the flavors you had in the bar, popular drink back then.
All right, very good. Okay, let's move ahead a few years and let's talk about the Harvard Radcliffe program in business administration for women. So tell us, what was it like to attend, and why did it have such an impact on you in your life?
A bit of history first. I went to St. Olaf College. I graduated there in 1959. I was aware that women, college graduated women, were mainly doing teaching or nursing or secretarial work. But I had been inspired by my dad that business was good and I wanted to do that. But I didn't know how. And at the same time, my roommate, who was a religion major, wanting to go to the seminary, had just come back from a meeting with the president of Luther Seminary, where she learned, oh no, women are not admitted yet and won't be for a while longer. So she was devastated. I was fumbling and not knowing what to do. So the idea came to me to go to see my favorite professor. Her name is Dr. Agnes Larson. We called her Aggie behind her back. Really, really good lady. So I went to see her and I explained my dilemma, and she pondered for a bit, and then she said, have you ever heard of the Harvard Radcliffe program in business for women? My world was about this big now. I hadn't. And so she said, perfect for you, exactly what you're looking for. You go right home and get busy and apply. And I will write a letter of recommendation for you. I had just done a family history for her class, on which I did pretty well, so she thought I was worthy of a recommendation, I guess. So, long story short, I did that. I had to go to Carleton to take the graduate record exam, sent off my application, and then I waited and waited some more. And then one day the big package came, and as many of you know, I'm sure, when you're waiting for college decisions, a big package is a good thing. Skinny little envelope, not so much. And so I had been accepted, and I was delighted on the one hand, but terrified on the other. The program was started in 1935 and extended to the early 60s when women were admitted to the 2-year Harvard MBA. It was the only graduate program for women at that time, and it was really half the MBA. It was 1 year. We were 75 women in my class, of whom 12 were from other countries. Jenny Cameron, a delightful beer-drinking Wisconsin girl, and I held down the middle states. There were some people from California, and then a lot of women from the East. It was case-based, which means that we had problems to resolve and be ready to report when called upon. However, so many of the women from the East seemed to be so self-confident and assertive, they were sitting like this, waving their hands to have their turn to tell their assessment. I didn't do that until the end. I was hiding behind the post, I think. The other thing about the program that was pretty rigorous, by midnight every Friday, we had a written analysis of the case due at a lockbox down in the entry of my dormitory. And then you got to know that those of us who lived in that dormitory promptly tore out the door and went down to the local tavern to see if we could now recover from another week and another written paper that we had just dropped in the box. So, for sure, it was one of the most significant things I ever did in my life for my own development. And I'm forever grateful that I did that.
So from there, Audrey, what led you to a career in human resources?
It's a fairly short story. As you've already heard, I had fallen in love with business from my dad. But I also had a sort of missionary zeal to help people. So that would say social work or something. But really all human resources ever was for me was helping people in business, because I worked in functions like employment, compensation, training and development. All of those are helping functions. So that's what it became for me, helping people in business. And it was a perfect niche for me, and I loved it. And I did it for ever, long time.
So there's a fun story in the book, and you talked about this before when we did the podcast. So you were the first woman in management at Gillette Companies in St. Paul. And you had two gentlemen who, within earshot of you, were complaining to your boss about you and your ability. And your boss defended you with a pretty great comeback. So let's talk a little bit about that.
The first position I had in human resources was at the University of Minnesota. There I worked with about a dozen people, and we were the same general age and stage in our lives. Really good period in my life. We dealt with the civil service personnel, all of the support positions. Paul, my colleague Paul, had just been hired to go to Gillette Manufacturing Center in St. Paul and establish a human resource department. He was brilliant and had a good idea every hour, but he wasn't very good with people. So he brought Mark and me, he invited Mark and me to come along with him and go to Gillette. I had been there about 90 days. And if you envision a big rectangular room like this, little offices all around the perimeter, my office was right here. 3 guys talking in the middle of the room Poor taste. I think they should have gone to a private room, but they didn't. They're out in the middle of the room. And my ear perked up when I heard my name. The two most significant, the most important managers in the plant were saying to Paul, Paul, we're really sorry, but this is not going to work out with Audrey. She doesn't know this and she doesn't know that. She hasn't done this and she hasn't done that. And we're really sorry, but it's not going to work. Paul had known me at the U and he believed in me. That's why he brought me over. He said, well then, gentlemen, you have a problem because I'm not going to work with you either. Turned on his heels and went to his office, and they sort of turned on their heels, toddled off to theirs. To make the point that some things take a while, with effort and patience, all that this took was 11 years. When I left Gillette, one of those guys was very much part of the program at my going away party. So 11 years of patience and effort, that's what happened. I got to stay.
All right, let's transition a little bit and let's talk about Johnson Companies right here in Lakeville. How did Johnson Companies come about?
When Brad and I were married, he was an Air Force officer and stationed in New York City. He didn't intend to be a career Air Force person. So we talked a lot about what are we going to do next. And the idea came to us that we began to study about real estate, and the idea came to us that it would be smart to either build or buy a double bungalow. So when we came home, Brad was finished with his commitment. We talked to my folks about it, and Daddy said, you need to go talk to Felix Childers tomorrow. And then he stated it again, you must go and talk to Felix Childers tomorrow. That wasn't like him. He was not like that. He almost never said, you got to do anything, you know. And then he described that Felix was about to begin an 8-unit apartment building. And maybe we could work something out. We sort of laughed and said, we had saved $5,500 in our 3 years in New York. We were very disciplined. I worked on 42nd Street next door to the Bowery Savings Bank, the Bowery Savings Bank. We were committed that we'd go every week with a deposit, if it were only $1. I think there were 5 or 6 times I went to the bank with a deposit of $1. So anyway, that all added up to $5,500. But we said to my dad, come on, Daddy, you know, he'll laugh. Well, long story short, we did go to see Felix. I don't know if any of you knew Felix. He was a high-quality, very well-regarded businessman, builder here in Lakeville. But his style was to not talk. So we were describing what it was we were hoping to do, and he kind of nodded and looked quietly. And then at one point he said, okay, I understand what you'd like to do. I'll consider it and I'll give you a call. Again, we waited and waited. Then one day he called and he said he'd checked us out and he'd learned that we were good kids, and so he'd like to do business with us. Brad had a job at Honeywell then, and I was back at the U at that point. And he was incredibly generous. He had a mortgage for the building he was going to build at a South St. Paul bank. He took us over there and introduced us to that banker, Lou Breguet, his name. And then he said, and here's what else I'll do. So the building was going to cost this. So we had a mortgage, we had $5,500. then there was this little crack or something over here that needed to be filled. He said, I will give you a contract and see if you're as good as we've learned you are. So that's what we did. So he deserves kudos for helping us get started. And then we did a half dozen other deals like that with Felix, where he had the contract. And our payment books to Felix are things of beauty. I think my daughter Ann is right here. I think we should frame the man. You know, on the first of every month, there's a payment. They're things of beauty. And we were in business a number of years before our kids were born, so we could do this. If the question were whether we should pay Felix or buy groceries this week, never a question. Felix always won. Hence, he did deals over and over with us. So that's the story.
Well, and if you look at the book, they've got photos in there of all of the different properties, and you'll see them around town, ones that maybe you didn't even realize were their properties. So let's transition over to the book. What made you decide to write this book? How did this all come about? And I bet it was quite a process.
Pardon me.
And I said, I bet it was quite a process to write the book.
7 years.
Start now.
At one point, it dawned on me that I had had some fairly uncommon experiences for a woman back all those years in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Starting with my dad's influence, moving on to the Harvard Radcliffe program. I also did a master's at the business school when I was working there in industrial relations. There were 4 women in my class. Everybody else was a guy, like 30 other people, I think. In all the years of experience in human resources in my own company and so on. And so all that said, I wanted to write a book, I think, so my kids and my grandkids know about my life. And I also thought there'd be a number of other women who would find walking in these same shoes to be at least interesting. So that was the motivation to do it. And then 7 years later, thanks to Mike and Ann, daughter Ann was very helpful too. We got it done.
So how did you come on the title, The Only Woman in the Room?
That's not a unique title. It's been used many times, actually. But the 2 situations I was thinking about when I chose that title, when we would go into Minneapolis banks to seek funds for our own financial development out here in Lakeville, the typical scene was Brad and the banker would josh about things, and I would sit quietly by there was always a big green plant. Plant and I would sit there, and at some point Brad would say, he called me Aud usually, Aud, I hope you remembered to bring the numbers. Yes, yeah, I got them, they're right here. At which point I got to join the meeting. And you might be wondering, why was I not more assertive? We found this style to work for us. We did it over and over and over this way, and it worked for us. So I got out the numbers and they made sense to the banker. And if we got to meetings 2 and 3, obviously I got to join the meeting right away. So anyway, that's one setting for The Only Woman in the Room. And then in much of the human resource work I did, I was dealing with managers. And managers everywhere, banks and in business, were white male people. And then there was me. So that's why the title fit, I thought.
All right, so what is it like to write a book? What surprised you the most? in this process?
I didn't mean for it to take 7 years. But you know how life happens. We're going along on a project, then life intervenes. There was a fair amount of that. When it was on, it was intensive, usually one detail after another, one list after another. Talking to Mike every day, and scanned 500 pictures. And so great gratitude and thanks to both of these people. I'm real sure it would still be on my to-do list if they hadn't jumped in and given me a strong hand. It's very satisfying at this point to have accomplished it. There are many times there in the 7 years when I thought, put it back on the shelf. So I'm really glad that it got done. I think it's a good read.
It absolutely is a good read. It's a lot of fun. So you and I have talked about this, and one thing, Audrey and I have talked here and there over the years since I've been at the chamber, and one thing that I have adored about Audrey is how much she cares about you when she's talking to you. You have always asked me questions about my life and what's happening. Audrey reads my e-blasts, by the way, every week. So those of you that don't, take note. She still does. But you and I have talked a few times about being working moms, and recently you and I talked about that as my last one's graduating here and leaving. And so let's talk a little bit about that. You know, you really talked about how balancing, right? I mean, being a working mom and raising these two wonderful children. And we all know that we as moms, that they are our greatest joy, right? Of everything we accomplish. And it's really in the book you talk about that, and you can see your pride in your children. So I think you deserve to have some proud mom moments and brag about your children a little bit here. One, and I know Ann is here. I'm sure she would love to stand up and be recognized. Sure, you can tell.
Why don't you do that, Ann? Let it go right ahead. This is my daughter, Ann. Krista and I talked at length that day about the challenges of being a working mom in a demanding career, and how oftentimes I think we all feel, you know, we did our best, but it wasn't very good. The goal, of course, I believe, for all the women I know who are working moms was to do the best we could. And we agreed that that's what we've done, and with that, we'll lay it down. We did our best.
Right.
So I have two kids. Anne was born in 20 minutes at home in one of the village dweller apartments over here. And I was 35, and people said, Audrey, you obviously didn't get it. You didn't get it. You didn't know what to do, so you just had her in your bed. And Ann and I have worked together in the family business for many years. And Ann really deserves much credit, along with Mike, about the book, as I've said. And then I have her brother, who's a couple years younger, who's going to be here today, but something came up, I don't know. He's a medical doctor in Minneapolis, as is his wife, Nicole. And they have 3 kids, twins, who are 15, names Eva and Leo, and you know how pleased I was that they're naming Leo, and Lucy. And so that's the story. We did our best.
Did our best.
Yes.
Right? Yes. All right, one more. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll see if anyone has any questions for you. Is that good?
Sure.
So that day that you and I were talking, you made a comment to me about wishing that you were 20 years younger, that there's more that you would want to do and get more involved. So as someone who grew up in this community and has seen it go through so many changes, do you have any hopes and dreams for the future of Lakeville?
Sure. I've always felt Lakeville has been well-planned, going from 300 people to 72,000 now. It just seemed the growth was managed well. And that's my hope for Lakeville, that, you know, being a huge suburb has got to be a big challenge in terms of it continuing to be a desirable place to live. And I believe that planning is a good part of that. So I'm hopeful that planning for the roads and the parks and everything else that goes into making a neighborhood a good, desirable neighborhood will continue to be done. I love Lakeville, and I, of course, wish the very best for it.